Hi, this is TrueProphecyNews.com. There's a lot of talk these days that the birth pains of the end times are being felt. And in fact, I did an informal poll at a convention where I was a speaker, and about 9 out of 10 Christians who follow Bible prophecy told me, yes, absolutely, the birth pains have begun. But is that true? Without assuming it's true, why don't we first go look at what the Scriptures say that birth pains represent, and then let's look at the facts concerning earthquakes and wars, for example, to see if they meet that requirement. We're going to start in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew chapter 24, and we're going to look at verse 6 first. And verse 6 is not the beginning of the birth pains. It specifically tells you that. It says, "And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, but don't be troubled. All these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." So, yeah, you're going to see those things, but the Scriptures are making it clear when you do, it's not yet the beginning of the end times. But here is the beginning of the end times. In Matthew 24, the very next verse says, "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places," all over the place. "All these are the beginning of sorrows." Now, the verse 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows, there's the Greek word odin, O-D-I-N in there. It means the pain of childbirth, travail pain, birth pains. So we can identify that particular verse, Matthew 24:7, as the literal beginning of the birth pains of the end times. Not verse 6. According to Jesus, he was very specific. Verse 6 is not the beginning. I mean, he couldn't be any more specific than that, but verse 7 is. Now consider in Luke 21, Luke is covering the same event as what Matthew covered, the Olivet Discourse. Consider verse 10 and 11. He says, "Then he said unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." Well, that matches up what we read in verse 7 of Matthew. "And great earthquakes shall be in divers places," that means everywhere, "and famines and pestilences and fearful sights shall be there from heaven." So now we've been given the added detail from Luke that it will be great earthquakes. So we've got two things that we see at the beginning of what's called birth pains. There will be wars between nations. He didn't say civil wars or insurrections or internal conflicts. He said nations. He was very specific. And also there will be great earthquakes in divers places. So, okay, what is a great earthquake? Well, in Luke, the Greek adjective megas, M-E-G-A-S, is used for that word great. Well, that's where we get the English word mega from. So, what is a mega earthquake? Well, let me say this, and I know this will absolutely blow some of you away. Some of you will simply click away from this video once I say this, and that's okay, but it's still the truth. The U.S. Geological Survey has made it absolutely clear that since they began recording earthquakes about 100 years ago, they have never recorded what they would describe as a mega earthquake. Okay? Now, that's the U.S. Geological Survey. Okay? I understand there are people out there teaching, prophecy teachers, saying absolutely the earthquakes or the birth pains have already begun, but not according to the U.S. Geological Survey when you look at the specifics of what Luke says to look for. So if you have a problem accepting mega earthquakes, and you have a problem accepting what the U.S. Geological Survey says about them, that they've never recorded even one, let's dramatically lower the standards for what a great or a mega earthquake is. Let's go down to an 8.0. And by the way, a mega earthquake, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, is a 10.0. Okay, and that's not the limit of the Richter scale, by the way. It keeps going up from there. But let's drop our standards down to 8.0 and take a look at this graph. If you go back to the year 1900 until fairly recently, you can see that 8.0 earthquakes and higher have not been increasing. So what about the last, well, let's go back to 1995, the last 20 years. I'm recording this in 2006. I'm sorry, 16. If you look at that graph, it's not going up as well. So you can absolutely see that according to and this data came from the U.S. Geological Survey, that there absolutely is no earthquakes taking place today that meet the scriptural requirement. Now, you have to believe in the scriptures to accept that statement. Okay? When you look at the scriptures, in Luke in particular, that he specifies it's great earthquakes, you just have to believe that he gave it to you straight. Now let's take a look at wars. Remember, Jesus is very specific. He's not talking about civil wars, insurrections, internal conflicts. It's not an ISIS-type conflict. He's talking about nations and kingdoms, in other words, government entities. So what's been happening with that? Well, for example, here's an article in the New York Times. The title reads, "War Really Is Going Out of Style." Why did they say that? Because warfare between nation states has dropped to an incredibly low level, a historically low level, and they're wondering why war between nations has gone out of style. Foreign Policy magazine had a similar article. "Think again, war. World peace could be closer than you think." Again, Foreign Policy magazine focused on wars between nation states and why they've just about disappeared. And sit back and think for a moment, how many nations are at war against other nations? You might find a few, but it's dramatically much lower than it has been historically. Consider this graph since the year 1946 until 2008, showing battlefield deaths. Battlefield deaths have dropped dramatically over that span of time, which is about 62 years. So warfare between nations is extremely low right now. And in fact, there's some academic studies that say it's at the lowest point since the year 1495. So what we see is, no, the prophetic birth pains of the end times have not begun. If you believe the scriptures, and that's the key, if you've been hyped and you have a hype addiction and you just believe these people that are hyping to sell products, that's a whole nother story. But if you look at what the scriptures say specifically will take place, and then you look at the geological and geopolitical facts, they do not meet the requirement to say that the birth pains of the end times have begun. You can conclude that the birth pains of the end times have not yet begun. And this has been TrueProphecyNews.com. Go to our website where we have an array of videos and articles that take a very literal and factual approach to the end times. This is David Brennan. Thanks for being with us.